Jason, how difficult is it to construct an offense for a quarterback skill set? I mean, I, to ask a more serious question, how difficult is it to have an offense for two separate quarterbacks that have two separate skill sets?
It really depends on what the skill sets are. So some quarterbacks, it's pretty darn easy to construct the playbook for their skill set because they got so many of them. They got so many skills, or they've got one or two. You might have a quarterback who only has one or two tricks, but they're really good ones,
Mm-hmm.
right? Dan Marino was not going to win any 100-meter races. You're not going to construct a read option for the guy, but the tricks that he had, that was a pretty useful ability to throw the ball downfield, right? So it's easy to do that. The biggest difference, you don't run a different offense exactly. The biggest difference with a guy like Gio is you add more reads to a play. So I guess the easiest way to explain how, at least this is how I would do it, is to explain like with Malzahn, Chad Morris tree lingo, which is probably the easiest for this. Let's say you've got inside zone. For them, that's Indy. It's not all that complicated, right? So you got Indy, and then if you've got Indy go means Indy converts to a read option on the backside. So now you have an inside zone read. That's all you have to do if you have a quarterback who's more of a threat on the backside that you want to get the ball in his hands is you give him a read. You give him a read option, and you say, okay, if he goes here, you keep it. That's the easiest way to make some shifts. And otherwise, you don't necessarily have to run a different offense for a guy that can run versus a guy that can't. That's the simplest thing. Now, the trickier part is if you really want to build a full offense around that. Now that's a little bit different. Okay, let's say you have a guy who can run, but he's more limited as a passer than your passing guy. Well, first of all, you're going to have to spend more time working and repping your run calls because you're going to have to spend more time running the football with him than you would with the other guy. You also have to narrow the passing play selection that guy you're going to ask him to do to the things that you think he can do well. The last thing you want to do is ask a guy who has trouble reading the middle of the field to throw a bunch of balls in the intermediate middle. So you say, okay, this guy, he's a fairly accurate thrower on RPOs, so I'm going to ask him to do, inside zone, but I'm going to have a pass tag on a glance or something down the field. Remember, RPOs are not about quarterback run; they're a pass option. So maybe you add more of that, and you say, okay, but I'm not going to even have intermediate stuff installed. So if we get to third down, it's either, drop back and chuck it on a vertical. We're going to run 4 verts and just let him chuck it and turn it into an arm punt versus an incompletion versus a long catch, or we're going to run it or run a screen. So you tailor how you call the game for that guy based on what his limitations are. And really that's what it boils down to. The more limitations your quarterback has, the more you're scheming around what he can't do. And then you're leaning into the things that he can. So you're pulling stuff out and you're saying, okay, can't do that. Not going to ask him to do that, which means we're going to have to emphasize these other things. And that's why, again, the more skilled your quarterback is, the more you can have in the offense. And that actually gets dangerous too, because then you can lose your identity. For a guy like Max, you're not going to ask him, especially after the surgery and all, to do a whole lot of read option and inverted veer. Okay, son, we want you to run quarterback power, right down that, want you to start in the A gap and work your way back to the opposite A gap because we're going to run inside power. Coach, you really sure you want me to be the battering ram here? For him, you're going to take some of that stuff out of the playbook and maybe you have him read the middle of the field a little more. So that's really the biggest difference. It's more about the sorts of things that you're spending the time in practice repping and prepping for a given game rather than like you have to toss out the playbook and, bring in a whole new terminology or anything like that. It's about what you rep and prep. And there's limited time to do that, especially in college. And that's what gets complicated.
Jeremy Bottoms in the chat said, what should UNC focus on for improvement offense or defense.
Yes.
We ask
Why not both?
somebody asked Brian Belichick on Wednesday, what went wrong and what needs to be corrected. And if my memory serves, his answer was a lot. And he kind of went off of that. But to Jason's point, identity. What's Carolina's identity on offense after 1 week?
Well, I would say what they hoped it would be is that they were going to be a physical running team that didn't have to rely on their quarterbacks flinging the ball all over the field. That's what it looked like. And yet, when you look at what North Carolina was able to do running the ball, that failed. And they were not able to establish any type of consistency. And you really don't get far into the playbook. I mean, when you look at what North Carolina did Monday night, I mean, they had 11 drives. 5 of those drives were 3 and outs. And then you had a 5-play drive that netted 19 yards, a 5-play drive that netted 6 yards. I mean, you only had 2 drives over, only 2 drives over 5 plays. So it's very difficult to establish any type of identity. And that really speaks to the fact of it makes sense on a granular level to say, all right, we're going to go 6 offensive linemen, and we're really going to thrive in the run game. And it looked really good for 1 possession. And then TCU made some necessary adjustments, and Carolina couldn't counter it. And then you're really stuck because what you're wanting to be, you're not able to be. And I think that was a big concern too, is that they just were not able to adjust into anything that was really effective until really Max came in the game. So I think that's what they want to be. At some level, you hope TCU is really good and that they're a lot better defensively than they have been in recent years so that you can do some of those things, especially against the weaker teams. That's going to be a key for Saturday for me, is if they are not able to run the ball effectively against Charlotte, which hasn't had a good defense, and let's say they've been a program for 13 years. They haven't had a good defensive front in 13 years. That's going to be a problem, and that's really going to be a telltale sign for what's to come, and it's not going to be a good thing. So I think more than anything, you have to be able to establish the run. As we talked about, Mac, harped on last couple of years, you need to be able to run the ball, but most importantly, you need to be able to run the ball when they know you're going to run the ball. And Carolina tried to do that Monday, and they failed. They cannot fail in that regard on Saturday. And I think that's what they want their identity to be. And if you can somehow establish that, then you take a lot of pressure off those quarterbacks, and you can really let them shine a little bit more.